few minutes. Good. You have a business card for later?
I did not. I can write my information down there.
Okay.
Are you on Facebook?
Yeah.
Orange Rex. Okay. And just to look for a person, I think I'm breathing fire. I may not be, but I probably am.
There may be many orange Rexes.
Yeah, but as a person, it's groups there are, but as a person, you'll find. And if not, my group, my Facebook group about this project is called An American History Mystery, A Tale of Death in Muskogee County. And so it's all very ominous, but all right, are we back?
Be thinking about where you want to eat lunch.
Yeah, we're going at noon. All right, I've got 40 minutes, so we're going to keep this kind of, she said lunch, so I'm going to make sure I don't miss that deadline.
Yeah, we'll see if you earn your lunch.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if not, I brought my jalapeno summer sausage and some wheat thins. I'll live. I may have bad breath, but I'll live. All right. The second half of my discussion today, I'd like to welcome everybody back. Thanks for showing up. Hi, people. Anybody watching? Other people watching? How many people are watching? Can you tell?
There's just 2 right now.
Hi, 2 people that are watching.
There was a couple more a while ago.
That's okay. We will be back this afternoon at 2. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So I'll be here from 2 to 5.
2 to 4:30.
2 to 4:30 this afternoon, talking about some individual stories, some great stories of deaths, fun deaths. Talk about Christian Science guy, Tom Pulley. Talk about him. To some fun deaths. It's fun. That's one of the things right off the bat. Well, here's the thing that I have to realize when it comes to this is the first fear is, well, you're just talking about a bunch of negative stuff. It's 4,000 death certificates. I mean, right off the bat, nobody's like, let's talk about the positive deaths. Right? There's just, but that being said, even when I show someone online, like let's say I post a guy that's lived to be 85, he's got 12 children and 62 grandchildren, he's been a lawyer, a doctor, a baker, they still put the sad smiling, emoji. It's like, dude, what do you want? He lived to 85, he had 62 grandkids. Like why can't we be happy for him? But I understand that there's a certain solemn morbidity to death where we have to treat it with a certain amount of respect when we get down to the nitty-gritty, which is why I want to claim these cemeteries as peace. My first thing was, we read them. Before I knew who any of these people were, Memorial Day weekend, I'm sitting in front, turn the TV down, open it up, volume 2, I start at page 1 and I read about half of it. Tuberculosis, meningitis, stillborn, 3 months, 6 months, gunshot, horse, train, car, bicycle. And it's not very long before you begin to empathize with just how rough, how fragile, how incredibly dangerous this place was in time. My wife, one of her first things is, why are all these people getting hit by trains? And I said, well, imagine, if you will, the road. There's a buggy, there's a guy on a horse, there's a guy walking, there's a guy on a bicycle, there's automobiles, and then there's trains doing this. And you're in the middle of the train. So you have all of these different vehicles, people, places. One of my sad deaths is a woman who is picking up a shift for her sister-in-law and chooses to take a shortcut and doesn't cross at the bridge and crosses across the train tracks and mistimes it and gets killed just picking up a shift for her sister walking to work. This is a dangerous place in time if you are living on the wrong part of town and you're just trying to get somewhere. If they do not have a pedestrian bridge or a way for you to get across the train, across the place safely. Streetcars, I forgot streetcars. Children get killed by, I have 3 children under the age of 10 get killed by streetcars. And so just streetcars, trains, horses pulling wagons, pedestrians, bicycles, cars. It's all happening all in the same street, all at the same time. And so when you first realize, how dumb do you have to be to get hit by a train? Well, when there's that much going on, maybe not. Maybe you just pause for half a second and turn your head, the next thing you know, because there is no forgiveness to a train. There is none. Some of the descriptives in the papers talking about dragging 7 cars over them and the undertakers having to remove them from 7 different cars is a very graphic image right there in your morning paper. But they're happy to talk about it. If the newspaper men of this time, when it comes to treating the violent deaths, it's clickbait and sensationalism in every way. The Phoenix just, little Logan pulverized before his mother's eyes. She faints in the street, I'm sorry, that's the afternoon talk. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Walker Martin doesn't get pulverized until after 2. Harding Memorial Cemetery. Back to what I was saying before. 40 to 50% of my burials are going to be people who have partial color, Indian or black, partial, and they're going to be buried sometimes in the city cemetery at Green Hill, but if so, only in the potters or the paupers section, which means you have no money and nobody to pay for your burial, which means no headstone. And so the only way you're going to be a person of color buried in Green Hill after statehood until about 1970 is if the city just has to bury you somewhere. Nobody's picked up your body, nobody's claimed you. Otherwise, you've got to be buried in a black cemetery, which some of them also have 4 sections. The one at Harding, who's got the little, do I have the Harding map? Yeah, if anybody hasn't seen that, there's a section there called God's Acre, which we think is going to be maybe where 4 people were buried in that. So as statehood approaches, and as the Jim Crow things start to kind of begin to develop into more solidified activities. Previous to statehood, from about 1840 up until 1880, 1890, until the Dawson, all this, blacks and whites are kind of working, living, drifting together. There's some of these towns like Boynton where concerts, they go out of their way to talk about the paper was a black concert, the audience was half mixed and everyone enjoyed the show equally. And they kind of go out of their way to talk about it early, how mixed and integrated some of these towns are with a sense of pride. And then as we get closer and closer to statehood, the papers tend to talk about it more with a sense of disdain, a sense of this is a problem that we need to fix somehow. And you can kind of start to feel that building up, and I'm sure they did too, which is why in 1905, they began to plot cemeteries. And one is plotted by a guy called John G. Lieber, and it's called the McGilvray Cemetery, and it is plotted in March over an existing cemetery 3 miles north of Muskogee. He runs 3 ads in the paper which say, notice to colored persons, I have plotted the McGilvray Cemetery 3 miles north of Muskogee, $20 family plots. And 3 ads, 2 weeks apart. And so in a month, he sells them. It's 2.5 acres, it's 110 plots. 1905, October, we plot Harding Memorial Cemetery. Now, Harding Memorial is a much bigger, it's 4 acres. It is plotted for 210 family plots, 6 double fraternal organizational plots, a whole bunch of plots for what's called the Church Union Mutual Benefit Association, which would have been a group that sold burial insurance and life insurance. And so several groups come together and get this cemetery going. And if you kind of see the ads that are right when it opens, there's 2 groups, Creek Undertaking Company, and now they're the ones who actually plot and pay for the survey, which is done by the city surveyor, R.H. Kellogg, in 1905. And it says Creek Undertaking Company. He actually, again, he misspells Creek and spells Creer, which causes an expert genealogist, Sue Tolbert, to list it as Greer Undertaking in her cemetery book. And so right away, through every step of this, I have been made aware that as an amateur, I don't stand a chance unless we get several eyes like you talked about. There's going to be errors every step of the way. I mean, she's a professional and she looked at it and went, you're right.
I transcribed it the way it was written,
That's it.
and that's what you do.
And that's what you do.
Yeah.
And see it, unless you had gone to the paper and seen Creek Undertaking Company without, you wouldn't have known. And so, of course, I got into this. Once I found out that I had mass graves in a cemetery and that there was an argument about it, that people had gone out of their way to kind of misplace it somewhere else for whatever reason. I don't want to get into too much of that, but at some point there was maybe some malice, even some intentional mislocating of where he was. For whatever reason, it led to both cemeteries kind of not getting taken care of because we didn't have a clear path to what the history was. We made it about one guy kind of and didn't make it solid instead of focusing on all the 6,000 people that are buried in those 2 cemeteries, which they're amazing. Like Harding alone, right in the way, you can't get 50 feet in without veteran. And it's just, they're everywhere. And not just Confederate War. It's going to be Confederate War, Spanish-American War, World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam. And I bet you some of those 90s burials, I bet we have a Desert Storm. I would be surprised if we don't. Carolyn Embry, who was the last person to try to reopen the cemetery. It was in 1984. She acquired it, and she, for a brief period of time, cleaned a portion of the cemetery. We know there were burials done because we see them. There's some 80s and 90s burials. And so at some point, and in fact, it is her daughter, Carmen, who I've been in touch with, who's like, you want to clean Harding? Go right ahead. And so we are in touch. Siobhan and I had lunch with her. She seems on board, as far as I can tell. She, like most people, has a lot of life. She just retired. She worked for the courthouse here in Muskogee for decades. And she just retired this week officially. Apparently, she had so much accumulated pay that she actually stopped working 4 months ago or something. But so she got to take I guess when you work, it's cumulative or whatever, but so officially just retired, even though she stopped working a few months ago. She also owns a dispensary in town, but she does not smoke. So I love it. I think she's great. She's just my kind of person. And because she's like, oh, I'm making good money at the dispensary. I'll spend something at the cemetery. And she says her husband has a chainsaw and she's going to send him out to help me. But back to Harding Memorial. In 1905, there are Artie Twine, who's our newspaper man, and these other men who are involved with the Republicans and the different various groups in town that are doing the very legitimate way to build power and money and a structure, through organizations like the Masons, the Odd Fellows, insurance. They are building something here. And these guys actually send delegations, multiple delegations, to the presidential inauguration. We're talking about statehood and how they do not want Jim Crow to be part of Oklahoma State. They are trying to fight against what they knew was coming. But even though they were fighting against it, they still know we've got to go to the cemetery. So they go north of town. They're not allowed that one in town, but north of town, and they plot this Harding Memorial Cemetery. And at the time, I bet they put a lot of money and energy and thought into it. Because if you see it, it's kind of creative. It's artistic almost when you look at the layout. Somebody has put some time into it. And right in the center, that's one of the first things I went to when I first went in there. I wanted to find Fraternal Circle. And of course, you get in there right away. They're older headstones starting 1905, 1908, all marked with the little symbols, the different, and some of them, like in the books, they're kind of hard to find because some of the Black Masonic symbols are different. They have little different twists on them. And so I actually got a book on that. And I'm going to start learning what those, to see if I can't recognize some of what they're doing there with some of this symbology. But it doesn't, I'll tell you this, it doesn't need to be in a forest where nobody gets to see it. It needs to be opened up and people need to be able to get in there. And so here's what I think needs to be done. My plan is not to go in and clean the cemetery. My plan is to go clear the roads so that families that want to get in and access their family plot and begin to care for it can do so. That's my first plan, is to just go in, and if you want to be able to get to your grandma's plot, I want to make sure that you have an access road, a place to park, and can do so without a weed eater and a weed whacker. That's it. And there are very clear roads laid out on my map. They're old asphalt, but I've gone in there. There's some asphalt. We're going to eventually get the layer of leaves and dirt off of what will be a road. And so once those roads are secure, I will begin to connect families. Now, what's kind of cool about this is right in the front corner are two kind of very important family plots. One is the Ragsdales. Now, William Ragsdale, they ran a funeral home and undertaking mortuary service here in town under the same name for 127 years. And then it became House of Lynn, which was family direct somehow, right? Is that correct, or am I making that up?
No.
They're not related.
No.
Not related. Okay. When did that change take place? 10?
No, not that long.
Not till
5.
10.
Maybe 5 years ago. Maybe.
Okay.
Just recent.
But up until very recently, it was consistently the Ragsdale. Well, they have buried probably, I'm going to say 75 to 80% of everyone buried in Harding Memorial or Agency or our Black cemeteries in town. But definitely Harding, they're fully responsible for putting 75%, and they have at least 3 family plots there. Dan Ragsdale has one, and William Ragsdale and William Ragsdale Jr. or Senior and Junior have nice big stones right as you come in, and they're going to be right there. Right behind them is the Elliott family. Now, Mary Elliott, who's related to them, I'm not sure exactly how, but she is with the Smithsonian. She's a curator for the Museum of African American Culture. And so we have a person that literally is in Washington, D.C., a curator at the Smithsonian African American Culture Museum, whose great grandmother is right there. We're going to clean her plot and get a road to it. And so opening right out the bat, if I just do these two plots, and I'm not talking about cleaning heads, so it's just rake them. Just make it where I can walk in and show them to people and they can come visit. We're going to start to get some attention and the kind of attention we want, which is some positive families who have a legacy to protect. Because there is some great history. You run an undertaking house in a town, you bury thousands of people. That's a legacy I'm going to try to protect for them. I want to try to protect his legacy by cleaning that cemetery, cleaning agency, and going forth. Now back to, there's two parts this time. There's a group called the Commercial Industrial Association. This is a group that is Black businessmen, Black and Indian businessmen, mixed businessmen. If you have, like we talked about, if you have a drop, you need to be in this group. And this is kind of a Muskogee version of Booker T. Washington's National Negro Businessmen's League. And in fact, in 1912, they decide they want the National Negro Businessmen's League conference to take place in Muskogee. And they would get with another member of this group called William Prentice Green, who's a famous photographer. He's got some photographs hanging in the Oklahoma Historical Society, but he photographed white, Black, and Indian people and was very well known for being the best photographer in Muskogee. Is that correct?
Mhm.
Yeah. And so he kind of had a reputation as being, it didn't matter, he's the best guy. And so they commissioned an 84-inch by 54-inch portrait of Booker T. Washington, the largest portrait of Booker T. Washington ever made. So this is the dimensions. 84 by 54. And they have him make it in his studio. They put it on a train with the Wigman's Auxiliary Club, along with all their exhibits from the Muskogee Businessmen's Association to the 1912 conference in Chicago. They present it to them in front of a standing ovation. Immediately afterwards, they vote where the next one's supposed to be in 2 years. They choose Muskogee. And so this group that kind of built this cemetery, at least 10 men that are in this group were associated with either the incorporation or the original building through Greek undertaking or home undertaking this cemetery. They're responsible for bringing Booker T. Washington here in 1914. And so this is a very moving, 2nd Street, like she said, there's none of it that remains. But at one time, like Black Wall Street in Greenwood, was a very wealthy lawyers, bankers, doctors, dentists, real estate, every dressmakers, tailors, shoes. Just think ritzy, think, the nice fancy shopping strip, they had it there. And then one street over, we have 3rd Street, which is the saloon equivalent of the same kind of area. It's, you're more seedier side, but again, not seedy. It's still money. You have to think at this time, these were 2-story brick buildings. These were 3-story brick buildings. These were not shanties. This particular street and these particular men were masons and educators. And like one of them, you get some overlap with this guy called E.D. Jefferson, who was the Grand Master of the Oddfellows in local. And then this guy, Green Curran, who comes in, who was Oklahoma's first Black legislator back when we were in the Indian Territory. But all these men have connections to money, power, and wealth at this time. And so we're doing a disservice if we look at 2nd Street as it is today. And we think that's where they were, because it's all gone. Systematically, it was just erased. But at this time, and hopefully someday I'm going to find a kid that wants to rebuild this in Minecraft or Visual. You know that it would be, I would love to rebuild a virtual 2nd Street and kind of put some of these real people into that. And so you can see it, because I could describe it all day long, but just like trying to rebuild when they talk about Greenwood and the tragedy that happened there, we just don't have enough pictures and documentation of what it looked like before it was gone.
We got some pictures, so.
We have some, and they're impressive. When you look, you're like, wow, it's a street that you look like, okay, that's how it happened in place. And when you go in and you see these cemeteries, and there's this first thought, in today's climate especially, I went, and before I did any talking, I kind of looked at articles that about black cemeteries that were neglected. And on Facebook, there was one in the city where somebody had posted, it's 6 miles from my house, and I'm going to get to cleaning it on my side. I'm just going to take my lawnmower down there on the weekends. And so when I don't have an itch and I can't drive to Muskogee, I can get it out by working on one near my house. I forgot my thought. What was I talking about? Do you remember? All right. Anyway, online on Facebook, one of the comments was, well, why should I care? That's a black people problem. They should clean their own cemetery. And so I got to thinking about it from that perspective of how we got to that line of thinking. But let me tell you about from their line of thinking. Imagine that cemetery, which is north of town, forced to be north of town. You were forced to be buried there. If you were buried in the city cemetery, you got no headstone at all. Bass Reeves owned 2 children, Bass Reeves Jr. and Homer Reeves, buried in 1901, 1903, had the privilege of being buried in Green Hill. They are not allowed to have headstones. So that looks like a grass soccer field. I mean, and there are 22 people there, correct? There are 22.
Plus them, it's 24.
24 people in section 37, and it is just lawn. There's not a single marker or a single stone. And let me tell you what there is when you go just a little bit over where they moved people from the older cemetery in the first place. For the white people, there's how many unknown heads? 100? 80, 50, a bunch. There's 3 rows that all say unknown, 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 unknown. So all of those are labeled. We can get one on all those, but for some reason 37 is still sitting there. And so when you look at that and you go, gosh, even Bass Reeves' own kids right there they are. Why is he not there with them? Well, because by 1907, we're no longer even allowing you to be there with no headstone. You're forced to go north of town. Then in 1932, we start burying at Booker T, which is a little bit closer to town. It's newer, it's nicer, it's closer. And so we start, of course we choose it. Of course, the next generation of people, it's a new freedom. We get to be closer. And then in 1970, when we can finally be buried in Green Hill with our neighbors and friends that are white, and we've got normal lives. We're not just living in a black box or a white box. We want to be buried in the city cemetery with everybody else. Of course they choose it. And so you think, why is that cemetery up there not upkept? Because even at its best, it's a reminder that they were less than. In other words, perfect. Even perfect, that cemetery is still a representation of when they weren't allowed to be close, when they weren't allowed to be equal. And so even at its very best, it is a symbol of oppression. And so that's why it's neglected in the forest, and that's why it's my job to clean it. That's it. That's why because the families, I'm going to give them the opportunity to do it, and they will. But the acknowledgement that it's not their job to make equality happen, because they weren't the ones who made themselves unequal. I can make equality happen. And it's simple, because I can visit my family. I have the freedom to do this because I don't have to waste it on my own history being prepared. I can find it. I know where they are. Go visit them anytime I want. All my family, nice, neat, clean cemeteries. All my genealogy has been done by my aunts who have way too much time on their hands because they live in big fancy houses with computers and can take vacations to go visit all. I mean, they had all this money and freedom to go travel around. One of them even went to Europe and met all the family members from that side of the family. They had that freedom to do that. I want these people to have that freedom, to be able to connect with their family that I've always had. And so when it comes to Harding, the first thing I've got to do is I've got to build a list. Find the grave. The best list out there is about 145. I can add 429 from just my 7 years. So yeah, we go from 145 to 600 plus. Then when we go from the 1905 to 1910 obituaries, which are before my time, I can add about another 80. And then we start to get other newspaper mentions from Kansas and other places. I could fill out another about 20 from that time period before. And so even before we get to 19, I'm gonna have 500 or 600 just from the first 5 years Harding was open. And then my average 60 a year, I'm gonna assume that continues. We've got burials. There's a rezoning called the Dameron Resurvey, which I can't find anything about at the courthouse. Dameron was a city surveyor for the city of Muskogee in 1929 and 30. So the reason I'm guessing the Dameron Resurvey was done in 1930 is because that's when Dameron was city surveyor. But there's no record of it. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what they did. What I do know is that the land now says 7 acres and the plotting is 4.05. So there's 3 more acres to it than what I have a map for. Now, my map doesn't have any, it has a dozen names on it. It doesn't have individual family names. What that is going to consist of, we have yet to find a single, the landowner, Carmen, has been 3 times now. She worked for the courthouse. It's not like they can hide records from her. I mean, she works for them. They don't have them. They do not have any kind of records in this town for who owns those individual deeds and warranties for all those lots. We don't know who owns them. We don't know what, and so what I'm going to do over the next 6 months to a year is I'm going to go down the street from my house and start scrubbing all of the newspaper obituaries that aren't on newspapers.com or online. They're on little microphone reels, and I'm just going to go through a week at a time, do a week a day for the next 6 months until I'm caught up into 1921, until I don't think I get to stop until 1990. Well, the Oklahoma, the Eagle, they have barrels in Harding all the way 87, 88, 89. Like I keep finding obituaries. So I think I'm going to have to get into the 90s. I think we're still, I know that Ragsdale's buried there in 93. Sue knows somebody that she said they buried a child around 2010, right? Cut him with a weed eater probably or something to get in there. Yeah. Can you imagine you got a family plot and you're cutting in with a weed eater to bury a child that's passed? I think I can fix that. And it doesn't seem like anything but a reward in fixing that. There just isn't anything but a way to feel good and feel great and be useful than to help fix this little problem. And so far, all I've done is we've gone and there's a corner post that sits on the corner of southeast. It's an obelisk. It's about this tall. And I just trimmed out about 5 feet with my little weed eater as a symbolic gesture. And I'm going to work from there, starting in 20 by 20 foot sections from that corner going north until I find the next pole. And then I'm going to work my way back to the front. And I'm just going to eat this elephant one bite at a time. And I'm going to use the history of that commercial industrial association as I find those men. And for instance, Elliot, who was the clother, who had a store on Second, a clothing store in Taylor, had a store on Second. He's the one who's related to Mariel at the Smithsonian. Once I clean their plot, I'll connect them. Once I find my neighbor's plot, they're going to do a memorial service at their church for his grandmother. They're going to prepare some funeral songs and a memorial, and they're going to speak. And then I'm going to film that. And then we're going to add that to some pictures, and we're going to send that out there as part of a documentary. And then we're going to find 5 or 6 families, and then we have a whole document, and I'm going to do it one at a time. Because there's this first instinct when you go right in there, you see, like right away when I showed the veterans headstones, I had 4 people contact me. I want to come clean that headstone. They're all old ladies, got their old toothbrushes and their kits and their gear. And I mean, isn't that the first instinct when you see that, you want to go fix it? There is when you talk to larger groups of people, you realize that some people have a problem with cleaning headstones that don't belong to you or someone else. So we're going to give those families, we want to make sure that before I just go in there and start deciding that I should clean your headstone, I'm going to make a chance to do your genealogy and to find out that if you have somebody that's related to. That being said, if 9 family members say no and 1 says yes, I'm cleaning your headstone. I think that's where our goal is, to make it live for another generation that isn't affected by why it's here. Because there is still a lot of guilt, a lot of shame, there's going to be a lot of negativity associated with just touching. I mean, just from the very beginning, just beginning to talk about, for some people, they're going to be very sensitive. Right away, like I said, all of my lessons got taught right away. Like one of the first records I posted was in the Muskogee history group. I said, hey, anybody want to see any certificates? Throw me out a name. And she says, hey, do you have Fannie Weaver? We've been looking for her for a while. And I find Fannie Weaver, and it says carbolic acid poisoning, suicidal intent. And I post on there, hey, I might just message you privately about this. And then this other girl, Amber, comes on and says, why are you messaging that one private? You've been posting everybody else's. And I said, well, it's kind of a family situation. I thought maybe it was better. She said, well, I'm family and I want it out. And I said, oh, you're related? She said, yes. That woman who asked for it is my mother, and she's lied to me about how my great-grandmother died, and I know it. And so sure enough, I slap it right down there on the page. She told her she'd been burned in a fire. And so right there, I mean, literally, here's a 110-year-old document. They had fought over this for death. I mean, it was a source of contention. Not just this incident, but the lying about it. This need to present us as differently than we are. And what's amazing about that is these two had not spoken. Her mother tells me that's the first time she had spoken to her in over 5 years, was that comment on that Facebook. But since then, they've started talking about Fanning and how maybe it possibly could have been the husband. But we're starting to bond over this. Now that the ghost is out, now it's out. Now that the skeleton's out of the closet. And I can't help but think that that's maybe needing to happen for a whole county, for a whole group of people. We just need to get the skeleton out of the closet and talk about it. And I think it's going to be tough at first. I think some people are going to be angry. But I think that when it comes to Harding, there's no question that you don't get to that level of neglect without there being trepidation and fear and negative energy associating every attempt going to do it. They're just, I can't imagine that those people that have tried to get momentum behind this haven't had frustration with the wall. Let me tell you what these records are. They're just going to smash that wall. I got Bass Reeves in here. Oh, more Bass Reeves. And I'm going to shout it. And I'm going to use it. Now, do I care about all 3,000 to 5,000 people in there? More than him, but equally, let's say 3,000 to 5,000 times more if we count them all equally. But as far as he goes, he is what gets people here. He's what's going to get us into these seats, and he's what I ultimately will come to gain a respect for Bass Reeves, as everyone else does. Now, to begin with, I have this very outsider kind of almost perspective. I own his death certificate. So what I did is I went on newspapers.com and clippings. You can do anybody familiar with the newspapers? You make these little clippings. Well, if you're a poor person like me and you can't afford newspapers.com, you can click on someone's clipping. And then you can go into a list of all their clippings, and then you can go into a list of everybody's clippings, and they're all free. And then you can type in Bass Reeves, and you get to see everything the U.S. Marshals Museum curator has ever clipped, everything, what's her name, Jonita? That writes for the paper? Everything she's ever clipped about Bass Reeves. You can see everything that Ernest Marsh, everything that Art Burton, who wrote the book on him, literally all of their clippings. So you don't have to do anything. You just go in and start sorting oldest to newest, and you just read every newspaper article, and somebody's already indexed them all for you. And so that's what I did. And so right away, what I realized is about half of those things we don't like to present when we're writing articles, because they don't paint him as just the hero lawman. They paint him as kind of a mercenary guy. And I don't know what we try to do when we build a $300,000 statue and put it out in front of a museum, what we're trying to accomplish with the legacy and the history from a guy who never had $300,000 in his whole life. I know there's a struggle with that for me. And so I've never really quite understood that. That being said, I bet it's a beautiful statue, and I'm going to go see it in a couple of days, right? We're going to Fort Smith. So what I want to do is I want to clean his cemetery. If the sandstone isn't there, or it's broken, or it's lost, what I do know is that the landowner, the first time I talked about it, I said, your mother began restoring the cemetery in 1984, correct? I said, yes. I said, well, I've got these certificates, these records that they say Bass Reeves is buried there. Yeah, he is. Oh, okay. And I said, well, do you know where he is? Yeah, he's right up front. And so, granted, she hasn't been in there in 15 years, but she had a very clear, just, oh yeah, he's right there. Now, I'm going to have to actually take her to decide what she's calling up front, where it is. And I'm going to have to, like you said, clear a road so she can get in there and kind of point. But there's this kind of talk of, well, you don't know for sure that he's in there, other than I have a death certificate from a very reputable undertaker that says he is. That's my proof, until we go find it. Now, are we going to find a headstone? I don't know. Has somebody stolen it? I don't know. Has it been broken, damaged, lost? I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to find. It doesn't change the fact that I'm going to go in and start cleaning that cemetery 20 feet at a time and see what I find. And then someday I might just go, oh, there's Bass Reeves. And if I do, awesome. But in the meantime, I'm going to use that mystery to drum up some excitement and go try to get some federal dollars to come to protect this, because somebody at the Black History Conference did one of my favorites. It's our darling, before I get to the mayor's conference, is Mae Marie Elroy. She died just before her 3rd birthday. And there's a picture of her that her brother's great granddaughter had posted of her riding a goat, when they took the goats around to the fairs, and she's sitting in a little goat wagon, and she's just cute as can be. And she dies of an infection in her knee before her 3rd birthday. But she's my media darling. She's my page darling. I love her, and I love Cheryl. The moment Cheryl found out at Green Hill that she was at Green Hill and called Green Hill, and Green Hill told her what plot, she and her husband came and spent 3 days in Muskogee, toured the Indian Museum, the Three Rivers Museum, ate, stayed in a hotel to visit May Maria. One person, one grave, one person. I spent $500. Not a ton, but imagine we do that times 4,000. And then we do it with Bass Reeves. And so the potential, and they talked about just these small Black towns, just getting one group to come for a weekend, what kind of benefit that can have. And particularly when your bottom lines and your budgets are stretched, where you're just barely at the operating, you're still trying to get postal service and things going for you all the time. And so we have a lot of those Black town, like I said, I've got Braggs, I've got Boley, I've got all these little smaller towns that could use some tourism to their cemeteries and could use a trust that would protect us cleaning them. And once I get this machine built, I'm going to point it at wherever it needs to go around the county. Once I get the email list and all the fundraisers and all the people that got lawnmowers for loan or whatever. I don't want to do it though like it was done. I don't want to just come in and backhoe and brush hogging. I want to treat each plot as its own piece of history. I want to do it one at a time. I want to try to do the genealogy because it was broken. If it hadn't been broken and lost for so long, and we were just kind of a cemetery that other people had neglected even though they had records, I maybe wouldn't be so interested. But because I know these were broken, meaning these were gone for a long time and they caused lost links, until they're on Ancestry and Family Search and find a grave and several groups and everybody's talking about it and we have some coverage, I want to be very slow and gentle about what we do. Because I don't want the first thing somebody to encounter with us is we've messed up their plot in some way because a volunteer has done something. And so, right now, if people want to volunteer, great. We're going to be cleaning a road to the right of the cemetery. We're not going to touch a gravestone. Right now it's roads. And I've got a guy that is going to meet me here once a week and got a chainsaw, and we're just going to start doing it. And the landowner had gone through a personal situation where she lost a son earlier in the year and is dealing with some anger issues, her and her husband, and some loss issues. And she had just gotten out of counseling earlier that morning when I called her for the first time. She was sitting outside her counselor's office praying for an outlet for her anger. And I called her and said, I'd like to clean your cemetery. Yeah. And so I met her, and she, like I said, she's got a lot going on. She lost her son, she just retired, she's got a lot going on. She for instance, she didn't remember we were having, she's like, I didn't know you guys were having an event. What did we talk about the whole time we were having lunch? And that being said, I'm not in any hurry. I'm going to meet everybody where they are when they come. I'm not going to push any of this. My agenda is not to get it done as quickly as possible. My agenda is to create a long-term, really concern. I want to create a pride within this community, the state, about these people in this history, because a lot of hardship was endured through this era, through this allotment process, through this, and some people came out and strong and built strong, lasting legacies. And I want to talk about them. And like the Ragsdales, for instance, who somehow Junior. Now let's just talk about what makes this tough as we get right into the Ragsdales. I have 2 minutes, so I'm going to close with this. But like I said, one of the first plots I want to clean is the Ragsdales, Junior and Senior. Junior is in 1923, there's some kind of incident that happens in Sapulpa where some officers as part of a riot get injured or hurt or whatever. And they accuse Ragsdale of being there. And they come and pick him up in the middle of the night in Muskogee to try to get him to Sapulpa without anybody knowing they've done it. And somehow they manage to shoot him while he's escaping, traveling from Muskogee to Sapulpa. And so right away, like I said, it's just every step has to be taken one at a time. We have to make sure that we don't tell all the police horrible stories all at once, as if that was the only thing going on. We want to let each family come forward and tell those stories if we can. We want not the newspaper perspective to be the first thing that we show. We want to listen and let people tell. And I got that from, there's a lady in town called Margaret Taylor, Martis Taylor. She runs a group on the Facebook. And she said, the thing about these stories is they're uncomfortable for people. And people like to tell their own stories. And she said, that's what they're uncomfortable about when it comes to you, is that you're going to tell their stories. And I said, she said, what should I do? And she said, keep doing what you're doing. Put pressure on them. In other words, it's time for these stories to be told. And if they want to be the ones to tell them, then now is the time to come forward and tell them. And I agree with that. There is no better time than the Black Lives Matter movement, than the critical race theory, political discussion. This is the time, if you have a race issue, to get it out and talk about it in this. I mean, it's the time. This is when there's funding. There's so much funding for these kind of projects. There's so much interest in these kind of projects. So now is the time. There are literally 4 different specials being produced on bass reefs right at this moment, and at least a dozen other I know about black cowboys on the list. So right there, I've got all these kind of black. All right, how about, are you telling me time? She said I got to go to lunch, and my belly agrees. Thank you guys for tuning in online. Thank you guys for coming.